Hi everybody, welcome back to this, what will be the final in this little series for creating this basement. So we've done all our modelling, all our materials, all our unwrapping, and we are finally at the exciting bit where we can start to take all this stuff across into Unity. Let's get started. So we can see this is the basement environment that we had with our last video. If you've been following along, you should have something similar. What we probably want to do now is just adjust our lighting, just make it a little bit more dynamic, and we will take this across into Unity as well. So we've got 4 lights inside here and we've got some lights down the stairs, but as you can see it's quite flat at the minute. So what we're going to do is just adjust some of these lights until we get the look and feel that we want. Now you can obviously do yours as you please, but I'm going to just reduce these down to round about level 20. This middle light I'm going to leave as a little bit stronger, just because this is where we're going to be drumming, and this will actually be a real-time light once we're in Unity to make sure that we're getting reflections on the drumsticks and stuff like that. Set all these down to 20, and maybe we'll have these as a slightly orangey yellow colour. So I'm just going to adjust all these down to a similar sort of colour. Don't have to be too precise with these. And I think the other nice thing that we can probably do is have a nice strong light coming down these stairs. It should create some nice shadows and a bit more visual interest over in this corner. So if we just switch into shaded mode and we have a light out here. This is the default light that comes in with Unity, sorry, Blender, but you can see its position is not exactly right. So I think what we're going to do is just drop this in at the top of the stairs. Just pressing 7 there to switch into top down mode so we can position it, and into side view, and I think that looks about into the right position. It's going to be a point light, we'll leave everything else the same, but again I think we'll have a sort of orangey light shining down into here, and we'll leave the strength at 100, and let's go inside and see what that actually looks like. Should have created a bit more extra light coming down here. So you can see we're starting to get a bit more of a dynamic lighting. Let's just turn this up and see if we can make that a little bit stronger. And just play around with these settings until it's set how you want. So you can actually see now we've got a bit of a nice shadow and light coming down here. It looks like there's something going on in this room beyond just the standard lighting that we had before. It's often a good idea with lighting just to play around until it's exactly how you like. I think if we turn this one down in the center just a little bit, that's much better. So I think I'm happy with this lighting now, so we can get on and burn the textures. It's important to do that prior to the textures because it's going to take this lighting information and apply it to our textures for us before we take them into Unity. So in the last episode we went through and we named everything so that so we know what we're actually working with, and what we're going to do is just do each one individual. Let's start with the room. So we'll be using this same technique on every object and we'll be exporting it in exactly the same way. So let's jump into shading mode and make sure we've got our room selected. Now we've done all our UV unwrapping, and what we now need to do is tell Blender that this room, when we bake our texture, which image that it's going to apply that onto. So in our image settings over here, if we click on a new image and we'll call this room. Now this is where you can decide how detailed you want your map to be, from 1 to 4K, even up to 8K if that's what you're using. It's best to export at a higher level, import that into Unity, and then use Unity to control the quality of that texture. That will give you a little bit more freedom. The offset to that is it takes a lot longer to burn a 4K texture than it does to do a 1K texture. So this is really about getting a balance between how much time you have got to be doing the textures and how much detail you want, and obviously memory usage with inside Unity as well. You don't want something like this small paint can set to a 4K texture when you're going to be about 5 meters away from it and not able to see that detail. So most of our textures I think we'll aim for a 2K, and the more detailed ones will aim for a 4K. So I think the room being so big, we actually want a lot of detail on there, so we're going to use a 4K map and then we'll check what it's like inside Unity. So one of the nice things about blenders is you can actually do maths inside these boxes. So we're just going to times that by 4096 and press OK. Now that's created a new texture. It's completely blank at the minute and it's just called room. The next thing to do is tell Blender that it needs to use this image when we're creating our texture. So inside each of our materials, you can see we've got our room selected here, and these are the two materials. You need to tell Blender. So I'm just going to Shift A to add in a texture and an image texture. And in this drop down here, we'll select our room image that we've just created. Now having this selected informs Blender to burn onto this particular image when we do the burn. It's important to know that, because if we use the same material across multiple meshes, which we do in this scene, so we will get an example of it later, whichever one is selected is the one that Blender will burn that texture onto. So we'll take our room, I'm just going to Control C to copy and paste that into bricks. So if we by accident had our colour selected over here when we press burn, it will actually take this colour, this bricks colour, and it will burn our texture onto it, which will obviously not create the desired effect. It would overwrite our nice brick texture with slightly burnt textures. So let's jump into here, and that's it. We're actually all ready to go because we've done all the work previously. So I'm just going to move my head outside of the way so we can see the settings over here. We're set to cycles mode, we're set to GPU compute. You might be set to CPU, but it's worth setting this to GPU, which you can do in your preferences. I've lowered a few of these settings down, so I'm just going to put the render to 2 just so we can do a test and we can actually see it. Light pass will leave as default, but you can actually reduce these to around about 4 and it doesn't make a massive difference to it, but it will speed us up. We're going to turn off caustics and caustics because we don't have any in the room and there's no point in calculating them. That will further improve our rendering times. We don't need hair either. And we're ready to go. Now we've got our margins down here. In a 4K texture, a margin of 16 will be fine. But I'm just going to drop this to 6 because we can probably use that across all our images and we don't really want to spend too much time adjusting this for each individual image. The other things, I'm just going to turn off some of these that we know 100% we're not using. So we're not using subsurf, transmission and emission. Again, there's no point in doing any calculations if we don't need to. And we're ready to go. I'm just going to double check that we've got these selected, which we have, and jump into the render and click bake, and you'll see this time down here. So it's a 4K texture, but it's burning quite quickly. And the result should pop up over here. So you can see it's now taken that texture map and it's burn all that detail onto this texture map. And if we were to quickly jump into texture paint mode, it uses that texture in texture paint mode. So you can see now that this is what the texture looks like. It's obviously very noisy at the moment because we didn't do a particularly long bake on there, but you can see that it's baked in the shadows, it's baked in the lights, and that will allow us to have some extremely cheap sort of detail once we're inside Unity without having to calculate these extra light settings. And we're going to use that technique across all our meshes. So if we jump back into shading mode, and we can take this into Unity and actually have a look what it looks like inside there. So we'll do image and we'll save this image into Unity. I'm just going to pop out my favourites. I created a couple of bookmarks just before we came into here. So room and into our drum kit materials. It's called drum kit because that's the overarching theme. Just move my head back into here. And we'll just save that as an image, and that's ready for Unity to use. And the next thing we need to do is export the room. So before we export the room, we need to, in this particular example, we need to make sure that our origin point is set to 0, 0, 0, and that will mean when we import any of these objects inside, it will be fine. So I'm just going to right click, set origin, and origin to 3D cursor, and before we do that I'll just press N and make sure the 3D cursor is actually set to 0. because it would not be in the correct place. So let's set our origin again. So origin 3D cursor, and let's export that into as a FBX. So when we're exporting as SBX, a couple of the important settings are we want to export the selected objects only. If we don't select selected objects, it will export our cameras, our lights, basically everything in the scene, and we don't want to do that in this example. All we want to do is export our room. And the other thing is to set it to FBX unit scale. That will make 1 equal 1 meter. If you've exported anything from Blender previously, you will have seen something like the scale being set to 100. Well, on here we want it to be 1 on each of our settings, so selecting FBX unit scale will do that, and selected objects, and we'll drop this into our drum kits models over here, and we'll just call this room. And let's fly over into Unity. So I've started a brand new project, and you'll see there it's just brought in our room texture and our room model. Everything is pretty much standard on here. All I did was actually bring in the Oculus framework, just ready for when we're moving on into creating the actual environment. So I've just got the basement scene, and let's just bring in our room model. You'll see that's put that to 0, but we don't have any textures on here. The other thing it tends to do is bring it in at 89.98, which doesn't sound like much of a difference, but when you're adding a flat plane, you'll start to notice little problems. So I always have to set this to -90 instead of 99.98. And let's just grab our material and drop it straight on here. And there you go. We've brought into Unity all that detail in one go. It looks a little bit faded out at the minute, and that's really just because it's reflecting, because we're using this standard shader, it's reflecting all the light, which is all coming from this plain sky. We'll clear that up later, but for now let's just switch this into mobile and diffused, and that's removed all that, so you can see it's now come a little bit more detailed. And one thing that we can look at here is the import settings on our map. So I'm just moving over the wall so we can see it a bit closer. And if we click onto our room, you can see here that the size is actually set to 2K, but we did burn a 4K texture. So let's select this to 4K and press apply, and we'll start to see there you go. We've got far more detail in this map than we had at 2K. And this is where it's useful burning them out at 4K, because you can make a decision once you're inside Unity. You can even control these on the quality settings, so you can work from different devices. Extreme example there, we've set it to 32, which means we've lost all details, but you're likely to switch between 1K, 2K and 4K depending on where you are. The other thing is the ISO level. It blurs the texture the further away from the camera, so I'm not sure if we can see that, but if we increase this we might see the blur disappear down, which it is slightly, but this is obviously not the best angle. But you sometimes have to increase this if you start to notice you've got sort of weird texture effects. What we're going to do is set this to 4K, apply, and we'll use 4K textures on here. Obviously we burnt this at a very low level, so we've got just we've got weird noise on all our textures, and the higher we burn those out inside Blender, the less noise we're going to have. For the purposes of this tutorial, what I'll probably do is leave the bake quite low so that you're not sat around just watching me bake, because if I was to set this to a 4K texture with about 128 samples, it would take a while to burn, and you don't really want to watch a menu bar go up. So what I will do is leave it at a low setting, and once the video is finished I'll go back through and I'll do them all at a higher quality setting before we start to build out our Unity environment, just so we can see the difference in quality settings. So we've done our room now, and let's move on to the steps, and let's do exactly the same thing. Everything's ready. Let's do a brand new image, call this stairs, and I think we'll do these as a 2K, so we're just going to divide this by 2 and bring these in. There we go. And in our materials it's brought these in. So again we've got our stair material ready to go. Click into your material, Shift A, texture, image texture, drop down, stairs, and then we can just copy this from there and into there. And that is that one ready to go. So if we jump into render, we can now bake this. You might not be able to see due to my head being in the way. Put myself over here for a while. We've got the bake button here, so let's just click bake. Why don't I put myself here so we can see this? And there we go, all those stairs are now baked as well. And save that out into here, stairs. And we won't export the model yet, we're going to export them all in one go. So let's move on to our wood beams. And it's often handy to leave these exactly the same names as your models, just so that later on you don't start getting confused. I've done this at 4K just because we're probably going to be quite close to these beams when we're playing the drums, so it'll be nice to have the option of more detail if we want it. So again, into the wood beam texture, Shift A, texture, image texture, and select wood beams, and we are ready. So bake that one. And you can see it's not taking a very long time, but if we were to do this, it would take probably 5-6 minutes on a higher quality setting, which if we come across a simpler one, we'll have a look. So save that out, save image. And joists, we now know that they're called joists. Image, new. I don't think we need a 4K for this. I'm not sure what's faster, typing 2048 or doing divide by 2, but either way. Shift A, texture, image texture. You're definitely going to get bored of me saying this. Select the joist, just make sure we've got no more. It's called struts, but now we've called it joist. There we go, ready, and bake. And let's save that joist texture out. And next we've got our cardboard boxes, so let's do a new one over here. Well, we've got quite a lot in there. Cardboard boxes, Shift A, texture, image texture, drop down, cardboard boxes, bake. You can actually, so this is one of the reasons why it's worth spending that time getting everything ready first. You're able to fly through quickly. Obviously we're taking a little bit longer, we've got some talking going on, normally by me, but once we're actually into this process, it's actually really quick to get to this end process. So a new image, and this one has got everything in it. Picture frame, shelves, boxes. We'll leave this as a 2K. Okay, and this is a good example of we've reused this strut wood on some of these objects, and we've got this joist image still in there. So we'll add in our new one, so Shift A, texture, image texture, and if I zoom in on here, we'll actually be able to see it. Picture frame, shelves, and boxes. Now this is where if you accidentally didn't have this selected and you have the joist selected, it would burn these textures onto the wrong image, so just 100% make sure you've got the right one. We'll copy that, bring this into cardboard. Again, we've got the same thing, so just make sure it's selected. What I like to do when I bring this in is just click it and drag it a little bit. Sometimes if you just paste in, it may look selected, but I don't know whether it's a little bug in 2.8, but it doesn't seem to recognize that that's what you've selected. So moving that around just definitely tells Blender that you selected that one. Black plastic, picture, and we're ready to bake. And let's save that one, and let's do our bean bags next. So image, new, Shift A, texture, image texture, drop down, bean bags. And if we use any more, yeah, we've got the blanket texture on here as well. And let's save this one. And I think, yeah, we've got this left out, so what do we call this? Scrap wood. It's probably a good example of where we could use a 1K texture, but again we'll have the freedom to change that inside. So Shift A, texture, image texture, drop down, and scrap wood. And I'm pretty sure we've not used any more on there. Yep. And bake. And I think the only thing that's left is lights. Yep, so let's do a new texture. And we've got a few materials inside here, so let's Shift A. And I'm sure you can all see it along with me now. Image texture and lights. And let's just pop this into each one of these. And bake. And that is very dark, so pretty much just black. And that is actually everything done, I think. So let's take all these over into Unity. Let's have a look. I'll pause the video, I'll bake them stronger, and then we can continue. So that's just selecting all these objects here, and we're going to export them as one big object. So I think that is everything selected. Might be one of those times where I actually want to take these lights, because these lights will transfer as well. So let's take these lights with us, which is pretty much everything in the scene, I think, except the camera. So File, Export, FBX. Just make sure selected objects is done and unit scale is selected in this apply scale, and let's just call this basement. Okay, so I think we're done in there, so I'm just going to jump into here, and you can see it will now start to import all these for us. Just going to delete that room out of there, and I'm just going to delete it out of here as well, because it's often a good idea just to make sure that you're keeping things nice and tidy. We actually need that for the room. The other thing I've got on here is I've got a materials folder and a models folder, which I've just created, and I tend to put underscores at the beginning of things. Let me just not do that and move my face down here. I put underscores at the beginning of most of the ones that I want to access all the time, and that's literally just to keep it at the top of the assets folder. I'm sure you'll find your own way of doing it, but that's how I like to keep mine controlled. So let's drop our basement environment, and you can see it's brought the lights in, and it's extremely bright now. So, and if we have a look why, it's probably done as an intensity of 10, which it is. So I'm just going to drop all these down to 1, just so that it's not quite so extreme, and we can actually see what's going on. Okay, and we've got this sort of transparent texture, and all we really need to do now is apply all these textures that we've just created, and just drag them from here and drop them onto there. So joists, you can see is brought in. Let's put our lights on. Let's put our cardboard boxes on. It'd have been good if I'd have done this in order. Wood beams, room, stairs, bean bags, picture frame, and I believe we've just got scrap wood left. And you can see it's rendering this very quick, which it would inside here, but you can see it's not costing us very much at all to be rendering these things. And if we jump into materials and I just change all these to the mobile shader, that will remove this reflections that we've got going on, and that's pretty close to what we had inside Blender. So if we compare to Blender, I'll try get into a similar sort of position. And considering we burnt out with only 10 samples, the quality inside here and inside here is not that massively different, and all we've done is bring in a few textures and assign them to the model. So I'm just going to pause the video here. I will burn out all these textures and I will literally be back for you in about 5 seconds. Hi everybody, welcome back. I've been in Blender and I've baked out all these textures. I used 128 samples and it took roughly half an hour to do all the individual ones, but you can see we've got a much better quality, much less noise on all our textures now, so they look just that little bit more real. The next thing we're going to do is match the lighting settings inside Unity that we had inside Blender, and we're going to do a bit of baking these light maps out. So what we need to do is just adjust these lights. So let's take these first 3 lights. These are the ones that we had to slightly yellowy, orangey light, I believe, inside Blender. So let's just set those somewhere close. I'm also going to just reduce this intensity because I don't want it quite so strong. I just want to be giving a little bit of lighting into the room. And this point light, this one in the middle, is the one that we're going to use to produce our main sort of light sourcing. So I'm just going to turn this up just so we can get some nice lighting on there. And we've got this one coming down the stairs, which I'm also going to set to a sort of yellowy, orangey light. And I'm actually going to just increase this intensity quite a bit because what I want to do is create this sort of nice light that you should be able to see on here, which came in from Blender, but I can further increase that. The other thing we've got on here is a directional light, and that's what's creating this these light artifacts here. It's shining the light through the what is essentially a non-existent roof due to the back face, and it's creating some shadows inside our room. We don't actually want that, so I'm just going to remove this directional light altogether, and you'll see that disappears. This lighting at the minute is set to real time, so it's trying to calculate everything that we're doing. There's a total of 5 lights in here, all in real time mode with shadows set on or off. I think some of these might, oh no, they're all set to no shadows. So what we want to do is get these to cast shadows, and we're going to use soft shadows. And the same with this external one, we're going to use soft shadows. And we're going to bake out our lighting. So the lightings tab will allow us to bake some shadows in there. It will bake a nice light map for us, so it won't have to calculate that at runtime. But to do that, you need to tell Unity which objects to include in that light map. So, and doing that is very simple. Just change this to static. You have got some other options for static. Our one, we're just going to use. We're just going to turn static on for everything. You can just turn static on for light map if you want to be doing some navigations or just for the reflection probes. But in our case, let's just turn everything to static. Now that's made all these objects static, and we need to tell our lights how to bake. So they're set to real time, and you can use mix that will bake the lighting, but it will also leave them live, so for moving objects and stuff, but that does cost performance. Ours, we're not going to need that, so let's change all these lights to bake, with the exception of this middle one. We'll set to mixed, so it will bake onto the light map, but it will still work when we're playing our drum kits inside. And let's bake our lights in here. So few light map settings. Your default resolution is probably set to 40. Probably depends on which version of Unity you are using, but there's massive tutorials on light map settings. I'm not going to go over everything here, but very basically, light map resolution, the higher this number, the more detail you're going to get in your light map, and the higher these two numbers, your direct samples and indirect samples, the higher quality that you're going to get. The trade-off is just time that it takes to bake these light maps. So I'm just going to set mine to 10 for now. I would normally do this at 40 or 60 or as high as I can get away, and I'll just leave the direct samples and indirect samples exactly what they are. I'm going to include a bit of ambient occlusion, and that will create some sort of shadowing in the corners for us. and I'm going to increase the light map settings to, let's go with 2K for the light map size. Now if you set your light map size smaller, it will still bake a big light map, but it will stitch them together. So if it needs to bake a 1K texture and you've got this light map size set to 512, it will actually build 4 512s and then stick them together. But I think it's more performant if you've got one light map of one size as opposed to stitching 4 together. The other thing we want to do is in our models, and when we bring these in the inspector, you see you've got this generate light map UVs. So I tend to tick this, and it allows Unity to create some extra UVs that it can use in the light map. So I'm just going to tick that and apply, and that's everything set up. So everything is ready to go. Oh, actually, one thing I want to do is these light bulbs. The light bulbs are obviously very dark at the minute, and that's not exactly what we want. So we're going to create a very simple emission material. So let's call this light bulbs, and let's put this onto the light bulbs here. And then in the inspector, let's just change this to be a, let's go for a yellowy colour, and emission, let's set this somewhere in the yellows until we sort of get a look we want. I'm trying to get this sort of yellowy colour on the outside, but then like highlighted in white, which that looks about right. So you can see they actually look like they're turned on now, which is nice. So let's go away and click generate lighting, and I'll move my face out of the way while it does this so we can see how long we've got. Looks like it's going to take 37 seconds. Let's see what it does and how this looks afterwards. And there's probably one more thing we want to do inside here, so let me just let this finish. Sometimes this can be really quick and other times it's really slow. Again, it's just down to whatever you set your settings to. So I have waited a couple of hours before for these light maps to finish, but it generally gives us a decent result once we've finished. Right, so we've finished there now, so we've got some light maps. So if we look in our data here, you can see, and I think actually if I change this to, I believe I can change this to light map, baked light map, there you go. So you can see this is the detail that's been baked into that light map. So all this light in here, all these shadows here are all baked into a light map, so it doesn't have to calculate them at real time. So it's very useful really for that sort of thing. So let's just jump back to shaded. And I want to, these materials should have a slight bit of reflections in there, but at the minute they don't reflect anything at all, and that's due to the fact that they're set to this mobile diffuse shader, which I actually use this quite a lot if I don't want reflective materials, but for purposes of this tutorial I want to go through this step. So you can see all of a sudden these look a little bit brighter and like they've got a sort of wash sitting on top, like a white wash, and that's because it's trying to reflect the data, but it's reflecting it from the environment. What we need to do is tell Unity what these objects should be reflecting, and for that we use a reflection probe. So if we jump into lighting, and you can see reflection probe, and the room's just suddenly gone darker, and that's now because it's reflecting this grey colour. But obviously we don't just want to reflect grey, we want to reflect everything that's in the room. So if we check these settings, by default it's 10 by 10 by 10. Our room is 10 meters by 10 meters, so that's actually fine. But the height is much larger. Now this is not normally a problem. What happens in here is any object that sort of enters into this box will use this reflection probe for its reflections. For our case, we're not going to have anything outside of this box, so we could just leave it out as it is, but for good practice we probably want to set it to the size of the room. So I'm just going to set this to 4 meters, and actually let's zero this off, make sure it's in the center. And that's created our reflection probe sat in the center there. And we can now bake out this reflection probe as well, but we'll have to redo our lighting. So let me just bake out this lighting again. I'll just move my up here so you can see the time. Let's go into lighting and generate lighting. And you can see actually before it only used one directional map, so only 512 by 512. So even though we set this to 2408, oh sorry, 2048, it only used this size, so it didn't actually affect it. But once we increase this light map resolution, it will need to use a bit more of the detail. So you can see now our reflection probe has actually reflected the objects in the room, and they're now being bounced off of these walls, which you can't see massively well in there. But if we get one of our wood beams here, actually let's use the room, and we turn our reflection right up, so our smoothness, you can see all this is now reflecting what's inside the room. And at some point you're probably going to want to go through and adjust this so it's giving you the look and feel that you want. I won't do this in this tutorial just because of time, but just adjust these until you're sort of happy with the way that it's looking and the way that it's reflecting that light around. The other thing to note on these reflection probes is by default the resolution is quite low, it's 128, which is not a massive amount of detail. It's not a huge problem in here because we don't have any mirrors or anything, but let's increase ours to 512 and let's just rebake this. And let's see what we look like. Okay, that much better detail now. Is there anything left to do? Yep, so let's have a look down here. Let me just turn these grid lines off. When you bring in objects like these, there's always this sort of little bit where this beam here doesn't look massively like it's sort of connected with this floor. It looks a little bit like it's just sort of plonked on top of the floor, and we've obviously got some shadows and stuff that are helping out with that sort of look, but there's other things we can do with that. So I think what we're going to do is use a technique I stole or borrowed from Grand Theft Auto, like maybe 3 or 4 I think, and they use this sort of fake lighting effect. So because they had their character walking along and they wanted to have shadows, but they couldn't cast the proper shadow, they used essentially like a blob of dark shadow faded out on the edges, and that just followed the character wherever he walked. So that created a much sort of nicer grounding of that character. Also, when there's a sort of like gap between them, it makes it look like something's floating, even though all it's actually doing is the shadow is faked and stuck on the floor. So we're just going to create some of those. So I'm just going to pause the video, open up GIMP and put myself in a position to start. Okay, so I've opened up GIMP now. Let's decide what sort of shadows we're going to need. So we're going to want sort of square shadows for around our square objects, circular shadows for round stuff like this beanbag, and if we look at the edge of the room, we sort of have this same problem where it doesn't look quite like it's fitting in this room. It looks a little bit like it's plonked on top, and this should help a lot with that. So let's jump over into GIMP, and if you're not familiar with GIMP, it's essentially the free version of Photoshop. I used to use Photoshop quite extensively, but then when I started doing indie development, the expense of Photoshop just didn't justify it, so I switched over to GIMP. There was a little bit of a learning curve inside there, but not massive. So we're just going to create a 512 by 512, and we want this to be transparent, so let's create a new layer over here. And we'll very quickly go over this. This is not a GIMP tutorial, but I'm selecting a circle here, and we'll start in this top corner. I'm holding down Shift, which keeps this as a circle. We're going to shrink this circle down, so 100 pixels. That will make it inside here, and then we're going to feather this circle as well, so 150. And then all we need to do is colour this in black, and there's multiple ways you can do this, but I'm just going to select a brush, select a big brush, and we're just going to colour this in. And you can see we've got this dark shadow in the middle here, and then sort of fading out. So let's save this out as a PNG. And I actually did this on one of the other sample videos, so let's one that I recorded and realised it was cutting off my microphone, so I had to start the whole recording again. So what you're seeing here is I've done it before. So let's do fake shadow circle and just replace that, and then we're going to create a square. So if we press Ctrl A, that will select everything, and we're just going to follow the same procedure. So we're going to shrink by 100 pixels, we're going to feather by 150, and then we're going to colour that in. But first let's create a new layer. We're going to colour that in, and we've got a nice square one there. So export that as fake shadow square, and let's create one more, which will be our room. So to do the room, we want press Ctrl L A there, we want a dark shadow on the outside, sort of fading in. So to do that, we've selected the outside. Let's create a border selection, and you can see that's created this border, and then let's feather that border. So again, let's do 150, and let's just colour it in, and you can see we've got this dark outside fading inwards. And let's export that as fake shadow room edge. Now let's jump back over into Unity, and I'm just going to create an empty game object outside here, and we'll just call this fake shadows. Once I'm inside Unity, I tend to start naming things a little bit better so I can actually remember what they're called and it doesn't get too confusing. And let's create a quad. That's just like essentially one face of a cube. Let's rotate that 90 degrees so it's on the floor, and you'll notice we're getting this weird clipping issue, and that's because this plane is sharing the exact same location as our floor. So we just need to raise that up a little bit. So on this y-axis we're just going to raise it one tiny little bit there, and you can see that's fixed that issue that we had. Now materials, let's just, these are the three that we just created, so let's drop in our fake shadow square, and that will have created us a texture, but you can see it's obviously just a square at the minute, so we need to change our shader. So let's jump into standard, unlit and transparent, and this is really good for PNGs, and you can see where the PNG was transparent, it's now transparent for us, and we're going to use this to do our fake shadows. So let's just put one underneath here and just zoom. Now it obviously is a little bit large at the minute, so let's just scale that down until we're happy. That looks fine, and you can see this is now sort of grounded this beam into the floor with sort of very little effect, and the more of this you add in, it becomes subtle, so nobody will ever go, oh, you've got a nice shadow underneath your beams, but it is something that you will notice if it's not there, and we'll be able to see that in a second. So all I'm doing here is pressing Ctrl D, duplicating these and just dropping them under wherever I think it's right for one of these to have essentially a fake shadow on there. So I'm just going to stretch this way and this way and put that underneath there. I'm just eyeballing this, and we can go around and create one under each of these cardboard boxes as well. I might not do all of them here just because you don't need to watch me. Just going to change this to local so it keeps my rotation. You don't need to watch me going around creating all these, you get the idea. Let's create a circular one, so let's do another plane. Oh, no, not plane, sorry. A quad. It's just 90 degrees. Lift this up, not that one. And let's do our fake shadow circle. Again, change this, unlit, transparent, and it's quite a cheap shade of this, so it's not going to be costing you loads of performance when you're actually using this. Let's duplicate that again and put one underneath this beanbag. And the last one to do, and we saw a little bit of clipping there actually, so let's work out what that is clipping for. This is set fine. It's probably something like rotation is slightly off. Okay, so paint cans is wrong. Actually, everything looks fine. Maybe it was just the camera angle. Let's create our room edge, and to do that we'll use a plane, and the reason for that is this plane is 10 meters by 10 meters, which is exactly what our room is. So even though they scale 111, it's actually 10 meters for a plane. Let's lift that up a little bit, and let's drop in our fake shadow room edge. It's very annoying when it does this. If I were to drop it now, it will put it either in the wrong place or not on at all, even though I clearly want to put it on here. So let's just move it up and unlit, transparent, and you can see that's in this room edge now. And let's have a look. Everything looks set fine, and we can now compare this. So if I turn off these fake shadows and turn them on, you can see there's clearly a difference. Now they might be a little bit strong, these shadows. I've done them quite drastically so you can see it, and subtlety is really the key. And the way we could just do that is reduce this opacity inside GIMP, re-export this out, and you can see it's become a lot more subtle. It's going to be, again, a little bit down to personal preference, but there we go. So this has been quite a long tutorial, in fact much longer than I was expected, but we've actually ended up with quite a nice environment, and I would normally spend a little bit of time now just going round and tweaking some of this until I'm 100% happy with it, but I think we're close. What I might just do very quickly is let's put our main camera into the room and let's go check this for scale. So height's 1.8, that'll do. We've brought in the Oculus things already, so the Unity is actually all set up. So let's maximize this and let's go have a look what this looks like actually inside VR. And there you can see the, if I just pop this off my head, it might have zoomed in a little bit too close, but so looking inside here, everything actually looks fine. If I had a bit more time, I would probably build something up there. You don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, but that's just at the top of the stairs. It's a little bit open. Maybe I would stick a couple of walls up there, but the scale looks nice. The beanbags actually look quite inviting. So I would bake out the real-time lighting, the baked lighting at a little bit of a higher setting, but everything actually looks quite good in there, so I'm happy with that. So thank you for joining me on this journey for creating this basement. There'll be a drum kit tutorial out there as well, so if you're trying to follow on with the entire drum kit series, you'll be able to model the drum kits. We've covered quite a lot of skills inside this process. A lot of things we've gone over quite quickly, but I'll be bringing out a few more videos where we dive a little bit deeper into some of these techniques that we've used. I wanted to create something that you can actually follow along and get a nice looking environment, and I've actually used this process for 50 different environments that I've created for people. It's very cheap on performance. I've had this running in the Oculus Go headset with an entire house built in this process and still maintaining 72 frames per second inside the Oculus Go. Not so many real-time reflections in there, but using that mobile shader, you can really get very nice visuals for very little performance cost. So I would strongly recommend following this tutorial for one. That will take you quite a few hours, but strongly recommend learning some of these processes, learning a little bit about modeling and a little bit of the light settings inside Unity. Thank you very much for playing along with me. Hopefully I will see you in another video. Like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you shortly. Thank you very much.